the life and career of George Frederick Handel, a German-born composer of Italian-language opera who went on to become England's greatest composer, is an extraordinary mirror of the cosmopolitan nature and dynastic politics of 18th century Europe. This is the story of two Germans named George, one of whom became England's greatest musical son, and the other, the King of England himself. The legend. Here's the legend as it has been told for 300 years. George Frederick Handel was born in the city of Halle in the central German state of Saxony-Anhalt on February 23, 1685. In June of 1710, Handel was hired as Kapellmeister, that means music director, of the court of Prince George Ludwig, the Elector of Hanover, in central North Germany. 2 years later, in the autumn of 1712, Handel received permission from Prince George to briefly visit London. It was stipulated that Handel could visit London, quote, on condition that he return within a reasonable time, unquote. Well, 2 years passed. 1714 rolled around, and Handel was still in London. And while we really can't blame Handel, I mean, Hanover was Hanover, but London was London, the New York City of its time. No one could pretend that 2 years was a reasonable amount of time. Handel was AWOL, and his boss, Prince George Ludwig of Hanover, was not pleased. On August 1st, 1714, Queen Anne of England died and was succeeded by Prince George Ludwig, the Elector of Hanover, who was crowned King George I on October 20th, 1714. According to the legend, the truant Handel, afraid to show his mug at court, plotted with his friend, the Baron Kielmansegge, to obtain the king's pardon. When the king and his court took an excursion by barge on the Thames, Kielmansegge chartered a second barge manned by musicians under Handel's command. The music they played, a collection of dances now known as Handel's water music, so captivated George I that he pardoned Handel on the spot and restored him to favor. And everyone lived happily ever after. Okay. The truth be told, the legend of the water music, as just recounted, is not entirely accurate. By the time the water music was performed during that day on the Thames, on July 17, 1717, King George had been in England for nearly 3 years. In that time, he had heard numerous performances of Handel's music, including a command performance of Handel's opera Rinaldo. By 1717, the king had reinstated Handel's Hanover salary, which had been cut off in 1713. So in fact, by 1717, King George I had at least partially, if not entirely, forgiven Handel his transgressions. Which is just fine, because the real story, the big history here is not when Handel was forgiven, but rather how these two Germans, George Ludwig and George Handel, became two of the most important Englishmen who ever lived. Handel remains the most famous and beloved English composer in history, while George Ludwig, as King George I, founded a royal dynasty that lives on today in the reign of his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth II.